Okay, so just an update on this. I did have to pull the AC compressor because there's a bracket here with 4 bolts here, and then a couple on the front, right up in here, and then here, which looks like it's going to prevent the easy removal plus access to this. So it's 6 bolts. I'll just go ahead and yank it out of there. Not a huge issue. Okay, this is an update on the teardown of the Detroit 14 liter. You're going to have a crow's foot to get to this little guy right here. There's no other way to get to it with a wrench or anything else. So before you start, you're going to want a 1 1/4 inch crow's foot on a 1/2 inch drive. Make sure you be able to put some torque on that son of a gun. And it goes right there. And on this particular setup, that's the only way you're going to get to it. You build it back, you might want to cut this off and bring it up in here. It's just going to your heater. So if your setup's like this, make sure you've got that wrench on hand. The rest of the teardown, what I've done is I've removed this right here, and that controls off of the stem coming from here. It goes up to the 1 inch tube to here. All that's taken out. Like I said, I'm going to replace the gaskets here. I'm going to take the EGR valve, which is right here. You got a clamp back in here you got to take care of. But all this is going to be cleaned up. These 2 hoses right here, this one and this one, that go off the water pump into your thermostat housing, I would suggest you get those. Once again, you're so far into this thing at this point, if you have any problems at all with your thermostat, you want to do it, now's the time to do it. As you can see, I've removed the air cleaner to make sure that I've got ample room to work. Plus, as you can see right back in there, that's my water temperature sensor for the block temperature. And I want to get to that while everything's open, while I've got the system open, because I've tried to replace them before where you have the antifreeze in the engine and you end up losing about 1 gallon. So all that stuff's going to be done. Everything that has to do with the water, the radiator system is going to be replaced at this point on this side of the motor. Okay, so the teardown's complete now, and you can see how I've disassembled the charge air cooler, and I make sure that I put the clamps with it. We've got the hose that runs from the thermostat down into the water pump. We'll pull this apart, clean it up, make sure that all the hoses are new. This is your V-clamp for the part here, whatever the hell that thing's called, and the EGR valve where it ties into the flexible tube coming off the exhaust manifold. I like to put my bolts like this, back in here so I don't lose them, get them separated. This was the bracket. You can see how the bolts are sitting in there. Of course, the long ones are there, so all 4 of them are there. I pulled this air cleaner off. All the parts are in there. And then we've got the actual water pump. Now, how it is anybody got that off without taking the EGR cooler, which is right here, off, I don't know. I think it'd be impossible. Like I said, it's about 30 minutes to pull this off. You can see where the hoses are. I had to cut them to get them off, but you can see where it's starting to bulge here. So, like I said, it's another $30 to put the hoses on there. They rape you on those up at the dealership, but okay. You're going to want to pull your EGR valve off, inspect it here. I've got another video up about one that I found that had been welded in here. It's up to you if you want to do that. And then here was where my water pump was leaking. So we'll come in after lunch and start the reassembly process. It's probably going to take about another 8 hours to get everything back together. I've got to clean everything up. I want to test the EGR cooler off while it's off and make sure it's working properly. The EGR cooler, really, if you look down in there, I don't know if you can see that or not. Let me get that over here in the light. So you can see down in here, there's really nothing more than a bunch of tubes. So basically it's a small radiator for the EGR gases. That comes in from your oil cooler, and then this one goes back out to your water pump. The assembly process, and I want to go over a few things that'll help you guys out. Number one, of course, is when you get the water pump, just like your compressors, get all your fittings on there first, okay? This one I went ahead and painted it up. Painted the back of the block because I intend to do an in-frame here later this year, and I just wanted this part to be done. So you're going to mount the water pump first, and then you come in with this tube that comes down from your thermostat housing. Get that in, make sure your clamps are positioned correctly. You're not going to be able to get to it later on when you put the bracket in place. To get your EGR cooler and EGR valve on, you're going to want to put the EGR valve roughly in place and get the hoses connected up in here. You got an inlet and an outlet. The outlet goes to the oil cooler or the oil pan. The other one comes from the V-pod. And then make sure that your wires are hooked up. And here's where it gets tricky. You need to make sure that you've got a 90-degree hose clamp or hose installer, because these things are an absolute bear to get in place. As you can see, I had to put my porta power down in here to lift it up. It was just too awkward to try and do it by myself. And then as you bring it up, I had to manufacture this out of a bit, so it's gone, to be able to get that hose in place right here. And then you drop your clamps in. So you're going to try and twist it in like so, but this one's going to fit right up. This one's not. So if you don't have a porta power, then you better have somebody helping you, because you're not going to be able to get it in by yourself unless you just have some talent that I don't have. Then get your bolts in place. Of course, don't snug them up all the way until you get all four of them in place. And then the rest of the build is pretty simple. You just slap on your bracket, put your other pieces in place, and it's just the reverse of tearing it down. But like I said, you're going to want to get the EGR valve onto the EGR cooler when you get the cooler lifted up into place. It doesn't have to be 100% in place. Get it close enough where just before you position this hose, it'll be hanging down about 1.5 inches, and you can actually get some torque on these bolts. There's 3 of them. There's one back in here, one here, one here. It's triangular. You should be able to see it, and then you'll put that clamp on when you get it up in there. But get that EGR valve onto the EGR cooler after you set this hose without the clamps. The clamps don't go on until you get everything 100%. And it'll save you a world of hurt when you're trying to tighten up that one at the very back. It's almost impossible to get to. Alright, so the build's finished. I ran it for about an hour, hour and a half. Took it up to a little over 200 degrees and made sure that I didn't have any leaks. Some of the additional stuff that I did when I was in here, I just replaced this boot about a month ago. This one was about to go. Went ahead and did that while I was in there. As you can see, the 1-inch stainless steel tube that goes across to the intake manifold right here, that was leaking. I went ahead and replaced that because it's a bitch to get to when everything's in place. I put the constant tension clamps on there. This was all cleaned up and buttered up. And also, right back in here where the EGR valve, it's hard to see, there's some other videos you get a clearer picture, hits the EGR cooler. There's a little gasket here. It has 3 holes. I buttered all these up with some good quality anti-seize. The other things that I did was I replaced this hose here between the oil cooler and the EGR cooler. I did the other one down there as I discussed. You really can't see it. It's a little dark. I also took the hoses, reshooting the video. So I took the tubes here for the heater. That one I was able to get to. I took it apart, cleaned it up, painted it up, made sure we didn't have any problems with it. I got a little bit of work to do in here. I got to get the clamps in the morning. There were some hoses back up in behind the air cooler. I went ahead and replaced those while I was there. This is a stainless steel hose that goes over to the air compressor, and the other one was dry rotted. They had replaced the original, which was a tube, a 3/8 inch tube. They had replaced that with a hydraulic hose. The operating temperature for most hydraulic hoses is about 270 degrees tops. This one hits 400. It's generally the one you'll want to replace when you're coming off your compressor line. It goes off to a stainless steel hose. Which we'd replaced this about a year ago. That's directly from the compressor down into the air dryer. So we just went with, this tube. You get them made up for less than the dealership will charge you for it. On the front end here, you have 3 bolts, one here, one behind the pulley, and then you have another one up in here. So as you can see right there, you're going to have to pull that bracket off to be able to get to it. I went ahead and got the Detroit Series 60 paint, as you can see, and painted everything up when I was in there. It's about 24 bucks a can. Make sure you get it shipped in well ahead of your teardown, your rebuild. It took 4 days for that to come in. I was fortunate. I got it at Stewart and Stevenson out of San Antonio. They had the stuff on hand. I put new looming on all this wire. I'll straighten all this out in the morning, and I'll add my antifreeze. But yeah, we did a lot of work to this that pretty much takes care of everything on the passenger side of the motor. There's the oil cooler and the turbo is about all that's left, and we'll get to that later this summer when we pull everything else apart. But the front of that motor's done. I shouldn't have any more problems with the next couple of years.